So the plan for the first part of this course, funny enough, it's not to talk about idealism, but it is to talk about materialism, which is the reigning worldview in our society, in our culture. It's the worldview that sort of underlies a lot of scientific work that is done. The accurate name for this worldview would be the metaphysics of mainstream physicalism. And the reason is materialists say now that, well, it's not only matter in the way that was understood by Democritus. We are now talking about fields and, you know, and particles that represent force. And these things are physical. So physicalism is the better name. Fine. I will still use the word materialism here because this is not a technical audience, and I think it has more appeal to make more clear what I mean. And I also mean metaphysical materialism, not materialism as a set of values, like, well, if the material girl likes to buy shoes and have big houses, well, that's not metaphysical materialism, that's ethical materialism. That's not what I'm talking about, even though one seems to underlie the other, because if all there is matter, then it's hard to see another purpose for life other than to accumulate matter, because it's all there is. But strictly speaking, we are talking about metaphysics in this course. So first part, it is about materialism as the incumbent, so to say. What is it? What are its mistakes? Why it is probably the worst metaphysical option that we have on the table today. To motivate what I'm going to be talking about, I want to convince you first that even militant materialists do not understand what materialism is, especially the ones that aren't philosophers. The militant materialist philosophers tend to know, but the spokespeople of science tend not to know, and this leads to ludicrous situations. So it's very, very important to start from a correct understanding of what materialism entails and implies. To give you an example, famous militant materialist Jerry Coyne, in writing, has said a couple of things to me that betray a drastic lack of understanding of materialism. And that's probably why materialism is so popular, because people don't understand how absurd it is. One thing he has written on record is this: any sensation in animals, be they bacteria or humans, involves some sort of qualia. In other words, some sort of experiential quality. For example, what does it feel like to the crustacean Daphnia, or water flea, most of you would call it a water flea, to detect a predatory fish in its pond? Now, he's talking about not only water fleas, but bacteria as feeling things, as having experiential states, having phenomenal states. Now, a bacterium is a unicellular organism. It does not have a nervous system. According to materialism, a single cell cannot be conscious, cannot have experiential states, because experiential states are supposed to emerge as an epiphenomenon, a sort of side effect of particular complex arrangements of matter that are much more complex than a single bacteria. So right at the start, Jerry Coyne already contradicts materialism, and he is unknowingly and very naively endorsing some form of panpsychism or idealism. He's basically saying that you do not need complex material arrangements for phenomenal states or experiential states to arise. They are there from the bacteria on, and he's associating that with life, which is precisely analytic idealism. It's precisely my version, my theory, if you will, about what's going on. That localized consciousness is associated with life at all levels, all kinds of life. But he is, in principle, ostensibly defending materialism with this statement. Another one: I have never heard a definition of materialism that requires quantitative measurement. But that's Kastrup's definition, and it seems to be one he's confected to rule out consciousness as a material phenomenon or the result of a material phenomenon. So basically what he's saying is that qualities, experiential states, are not epiphenomenal, because that's what materialism says. Materialism says that all that exists is matter, and matter is exhaustively defined in terms of measurable quantities: mass, charge, momentum, space-time position, frequency, amplitude, whatever. And there is nothing left after you've described matter with quantities. There is nothing left to be said about it. That's the definition of matter under materialism. It does not entail qualities of any kind. The qualities are epiphenomenal. They emerge out of certain complex arrangements of matter, according to materialism. So here he's contradicting materialism again while trying to defend it. So interesting and funny and entertaining as this is a very serious thing. It's not comic because it's tragic. It is this kind of drastic misunderstanding of what's going on, even of what we say is going on, that underlies a multitude of errors in philosophy, in science, and in daily life, because these ideas largely guide how we feel about life. They guide what we perceive to be the meaning of our life, the worth of our lives. Even if we don't think they are doing that, they are doing that subliminally, because we are getting this message from culture, from the media, from your friends, from your teachers, everywhere. And what is supporting this is a comical level of misunderstanding and error. So let's try to get it straight what materialism is all about. What materialism says is that, I don't know whether you can see my mouse. I hope we can. It's a little laser pointer here. Amir, can you see my laser pointer on the screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So what materialism says is that the qualities we experience, like this multitude of colors here on a chair and a table. So in the world of tables and chairs, there are qualities like colors, like melodies, like flavors, like textures, and so on and so forth. Materialism says that all these qualities that we associate with the world of tables and chairs out there are actually generated by our brain inside our skull, and they only exist within our skull. They don't really exist out there at all. They are not fundamental. They are secondary. They are side effects. They are epiphenomenal. They are generated by our brain. What is really out there is an arrangement of atoms, a purely abstract arrangement of elementary particles, which you cannot visualize. Because if you visualize something, any visualization, even the simplest visualization, the moment you do that, you're bringing qualities into it. And according to materialism, there are no qualities out there. Qualities only exist in here, inside our heads. So you can't even visualize this world of fundamental elementary subatomic particles out there. And importantly, according to materialism, you will say everything there is to be said about this world, this abstract world out there, if you provide a suitable list of quantities that characterizes it. Physical quantities like mass, charge, momentum, geometric relationships, frequencies, amplitudes, and so on and so forth. If you pin down that complete list of quantities, then you have said all there is to be said about the abstract world that is supposedly beyond our skull. We do not have direct access to it because we are locked within our own minds, and our mind happens entirely within our skull. So you can even play with the implications of this. If you go out at night, a clear sky night, and you look up to the sky and you see those beautiful stars, according to materialism, the stars that you see, the qualities that you associate with the visible stars, their color, their luminance, their arrangement, it's happening and exists inside your skull. The inner surface of your real skull is beyond the stars you experience when you look up to the sky at night. That's what materialism is saying. Your entire world, the room that you see around you, the street that you see through the window, all that, the people you see around you, all that exists within the boundaries of your skull, because all that is experiential. there is something out there, according to materialism, that corresponds to the stars you see, that corresponds to the room you see around you, to the street you see out the window, to the people you see around you. There is something out there that corresponds to it, but it is not the people, the room, the stars, the street, as you experience them. All those experiences are ostensibly, putatively, within the boundaries of your skull. Even when you see your head, when you see your skull reflected on a mirror, that face, that skull, that head you see is merely an experiential representation of something that is out there, but to which you have no access. It's a sort of a little representation of your real skull unfolding within your real skull, which you, by definition, have no direct access to. You only have access to its representation, which is engendered, created by your brain. I'm repeating myself a lot because over the past 10 years I've been doing this. I noticed that it takes time for people to really internalize, for people to absorb really what this means. We are so used to thinking that, well, we are materialists, when in fact we are not at all. Because if we would really explore what materialism entails and implies, you would think, hey, wait a moment, that's not what I believe in. I believe that the qualities of the world are really out there, that the world really has colors, really has melodies, really has flavors. I believe that the stars I see up in the sky at night are really beyond my head and not within my head. Well, if that's what you think, you are not a materialist. And it's important to get these things straight. Let me go to the next slide. If there are questions, this is a good moment. If anybody has a question.
So just to remind everyone, if you have a question, you should have a Q&A box down the bottom, and you can just pop your question in there, and at certain points Bernardo will pause and I'll read them out. But so far, there are no questions.
Okay. Let me go to the next slide. If I can move to the next slide. Next. Okay, I think I've talked about this already, but it's good to go over it again. According to materialism, the world that you experience around you, the world of experience is within your skull. Your entire life, as far as you experienced it, is putatively unfolding within your head. So this brings us to another very interesting implication of materialism, a way to contemplate what it actually is. Look at what's happening here. We start from the world of experience, the colors, the forms, the flavors, the textures that we perceive to be out there. That's the starting point, even of science. When science took its first baby steps in the early 17th century, scientists began from their perceptions of the world out there, the objects and the events of the world they perceived. And of course, perception is qualitative. Perception is mental in nature. You perceive red. You don't perceive X hertz of electromagnetic vibration. But you describe red with a certain frequency number, or and a amplitude number of electromagnetic field oscillations. So scientists themselves started from the qualities of perception, and they discovered over time that it was very handy, very convenient to describe those perceptions, to describe the objects and events on the screen of perception through quantities. Because quantities could capture the relative differences between perceived qualities. For instance, if you would lift, as a scientist, a heavy piece of luggage, like luggage was back in the 17th century, you would have a certain feeling, a certain qualitative experience of weight, of lifting a heavy weight. And if you would lift a feather, you would have a different qualitative experience of weight. Through quantities, it was very convenient to describe the relative differences between these two experiences of weight, heavy weight and light weight. The difference could be captured with a number in a unit that we call newtons. not kilograms. Kilograms is mass, not weight, but I'm not going to get into that detail. If you get confused, then just think of kilograms. It's not quite accurate, but it will do. So this idea of quantities arose as a handy way to describe qualities, especially relative differences between qualities. And that had sparked the scientific revolution, because science is about observing what is on the screen of perception, describing it with quantities, and then based on those quantities, creating predictive models of nature's behavior. You use quantities to predict what nature will do next, and that's what enabled technology and the 21st century. In a nutshell, the history of the last 4 or 5 centuries. But then at some point, something very weird has happened. We have replaced the starting point, the qualities on the screen of perception. We've attempted to replace it with its description. We've granted reality to the description, and we withdrew the reality of that which is described in the first place. So now we say that matter, which is defined fully, exhaustively in terms of quantities, we say that matter is all that exists. In other words, all that exists is the description, the quantities, the numbers, the weights, the masses, the amplitudes, the frequencies. Now we say that's what really exists. And what was described in the first place, the qualities on the screen of perception, now that is secondary. That is epiphenomenal. That is reducible to the quantities. So this, in a nutshell, is it is quite equivalent to a painter who paints a self-portrait and then points at it and says, I am that. I am the self-portrait. Because the self-portrait is a description of something. And when you replace that which is described with a description of it, you find yourself in that exact same situation of the painter that paints a self-portrait and says, I am it. And then that painter has to explain his entire phenomenal inner life, his entire experiential inner life, his feelings, his emotions, his thoughts, the qualities of his perceptions. He has to explain all that in terms of patterns of pigment distribution on canvas, because he is reducing himself to his self-portrait. In other words, he has to explain everything about himself in terms of his self-portrait, which is illogical, it's absurd, it inverts the arrow of description. And that is exactly what we are trying to do under materialism. The self-portrait is matter, quantitative descriptions of the world, the qualitative world of perception. And then we try to explain the qualities of perception in terms of matter, which is entirely equivalent to trying to explain yourself in terms of your self-portrait. Good luck with that. That's the origin of the so-called hard problem of consciousness. We've defined matter in a way that explicitly excludes qualities. That's how we've defined matter. And now we try to reduce qualities to matter. We try to explain qualities in terms of that which excludes qualities by definition. Do you see what's happening here? This is not a real problem, let alone a hard one. It's an artificial question. It's a confusion of thought. We got ourselves confused very early on, and that mistake stuck, and we are living with it to this day. I see there are questions popping, so maybe it's a good time to answer them.
Yeah, for now I'll just go in the order that they were. So Josh asking, does this point to the inability of materialism to breach the explanatory gap?
Absolutely. It's a problem that materialism has created for itself. Because remember the little story I just told you, we start from qualities. Then we discover that quantities are useful to describe relative differences between qualities. Then we make the ludicrous step of granting reality only to the description and not to that which is described. Sorry, I moved one ad. It was not my intention. And then we create the explanatory gap by having made this movement of thought that is absurd once you examine it carefully. So the explanatory gap, it's not something that exists out there. The hard problem of consciousness is not a problem that exists out there. It's an artifact of bad thinking. That's essentially what it is.
And maybe just for anyone who doesn't know the explanatory gap, it looks like that might be the next slide anyway, you're going to get to.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I'll get back to that, to the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah.
Covered, yeah. So is it fair to say that we have confused the territory with the map?
Completely. We take the map for the territory now. Now we say that the map is all that exists, and the territory somehow arises from the map. That's that's the explanatory gap right there for you. We are failing to explain or to reduce the territory to the map. We are failing to make sense of how there can be nothing to the territory other than what is on the map. We're never succeeding that because it's an artifact of an error.
But with science, the description has drastically altered the human experience. For example, scientific advances. How do we reconcile that?
I don't see a conflict at all. I think descriptions are extraordinarily useful. We have advanced enormously as a civilization because our descriptions of nature are so accurate now. Not only the descriptions, but the predictive models that you can build on top of those descriptions. Because if you describe what is, you can anticipate what will be. Assuming that the underlying mechanisms of your description will hold going to the future. And empirically, we know that that is the case. We have extremely good empirical reasons to believe that's the case, even though logically, there's nothing that enforces it. There's nothing that fundamentally guarantees that the laws of nature a minute from now will be the same as now. It just happens that this has been the case for a long time, so we take it for granted that it will continue. So descriptions are very valuable, very useful. I'm not against descriptions. I'm not against maps. I go walking in the mountains every year to places where I'm out of reach of the emergency services, literally, for hours out of reach. I trust the maps. I carry them with me. I wouldn't be doing what I do when I go to the mountains if I didn't think there was value to the maps, in the same way that there is value to the descriptions of science. All I'm saying is that when you say that all that exists is the map and the mountains are not there, that's clearly a mistake. And materialists are saying that standing on the mountain. They're standing on the mountain with the map in their hands and they are saying the mountains don't exist, it's only the map. I think that's an error.
So questions come in. Can you explain qualities versus descriptions?
Okay. A quality, for instance, if you see the color red over strawberry, there is something it is like to see red. There is something it feels like to see red. That is a quality. Now you can describe red with a number, a certain frequency, a certain number of hertz or oscillations per second of an electromagnetic field. That's a description of red. You can add to that description and describe how intense the red is, how luminous it is, and that would require another number, an amplitude number for that oscillation. But suppose that you were born blind and you've never seen red in your life. And then a scientist comes to you and says, red is an oscillation of an electromagnetic field with these frequency in hertz, and he gives you a number, and that amplitude, and he gives you another number. On the basis of these two numbers, would you know, as someone born blind, what it is like to see red, what it feels like to see red? Or would something be missing? Even if you put all the numbers on the table that describe the entire world in all its fine details, would those numbers tell you what it is like to experience that world? I would say it isn't. And what is missing is the qualities. So that is what the qualities are. It's that which cannot be captured through description in a list of numbers. It's that which you know by direct acquaintance. Nobody can tell a blind person, born blind, what it is like to see red. You can only know that through direct first-person experience. All of your direct first-person experiences are qualities. If you have a bellyache, that's a quality, a bad one. Pain is a quality. The redness of a strawberry is a quality. The sweetness of the strawberry is another quality. Certain thoughts have qualities. Missing someone is a quality. Your entire life is a dance of qualities, both on the screen of perception and in your endogenous field of experience. For instance, the feeling of falling in love is not on the screen of perception, but it is a felt quality. It's an endogenous felt quality that arises on you and does not depend on sensory input from your five senses. So qualities is that which you know immediately, directly. And descriptions are the lists of numbers that we use to capture the relative differences between qualities. But even those only make sense if you experience the qualities directly. Otherwise, the relative differences between two things you've never experienced won't help you much anyway. So yeah, in essence, that's what qualities are.
And the same question is just clarifying, okay, so it's experience versus numbers.
Yes, qualities versus numbers, experience versus models. You could put it that way.
And the next question is, so this materialism is I think it says consensus reality.
We seem to have consensus about what the world out there is like. We all seem to be inhabiting the same world of tables and chairs. If you were sitting here next to me in my study, you probably would describe my study in a way very consistent with my own description. You'd describe the books here to the right, you'd describe the little workbench on my back and the fan on my back in ways consistent with mine. So we seem to be sharing a world. Whether the world we share is physical or not, it's an entirely different question. I don't think it is physical. I think the physical world is private, but we do share a mental world. And when we talk about consensus reality, we are basically referring to that which we share, to that which we can describe in a way that achieves consensus. Our descriptions are consistent with one another, so they are in consensus. Materialism is something more. Materialism says that, okay, there is a consensus world out there. That's not materialism, that's just common sense. Materialism goes a step further and says, and that consensus world can be exhaustively defined in terms of quantities. In other words, it's purely material. It has no intrinsic inherent qualities. There are no qualities out there in our consensus world. It can be exhaustively, fully described in terms of quantities. Once you give that list of quantities, you've said everything there is to be said about the world we share. That's what materialism is. It goes beyond consensus reality and it tells you what that consensus reality supposedly is. Should we go to the next one now?
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. I think I've already talked about a lot of this. The hard problem of consciousness, which was well, defined by David Chalmers, this guy here, back in 1994, I think was the first time he talked about it. And there is a famous paper by him in 1995. If you talk to Dave, Dave will tell you, well, I don't know why I became famous because I basically, I just put in words something that everybody knew. Everybody knew that once you give all the quantities, there is something left. You can't tell somebody born blind what it is like to see red by just giving this person a list of numbers. And that's the hard problem. Once you've described the behavior of everything in terms of quantities, something is left out, which is, what is it like to experience that which is described? And he called it the hard problem of consciousness. That's how he summarized the problem. And he plays his own role down a bit. Personally, I think that summarizing and pinning down the issue is a major step. It solves half the problem. Once you pin down the problem, you're halfway to solving it. And I think a lot of credit should be given to Dave for having had the clarity of thought to pin down the problem precisely. And he called it the hard problem of consciousness for very reasonable reasons, because it's a problem that arises within the assumption structure of materialism. But now we've come to the point that we treat it as a problem that needs to be solved, because the word problem sort of evoked the idea of a solution. We should solve the problem. My view is that it can't be solved because it's an artifact of bad thinking. We invented this. This problem is not out there. It's nothing to be solved. It's something to be circumvented, to be got rid of. Once we see through the thought structures that have led to it, once we see through the errors we've made, it's okay to call it a hard problem, but it's not a problem to be solved. It's a problem to be seen through, to be stepped out from. We need to step out of that and reacquaint ourselves with reality, with what is really out there. And what's really out there has no hard problem at all. It is exactly what it seems to be. We inhabit a world of qualities. We are qualitative beings. Our lives are made of qualities. I see questions. I can't read them here, but I see that they are popped.
Okay, great. So your criticism or opposition is more related to an idea of how materialism, as defined here, as too reductionist? And then maybe I'll let you do that one.
Yeah, I don't think the problem is reduction. I have nothing against trying to reduce things. For the past 400 years, science has shown us that very often, almost always, we can reduce things. In other words, we can explain certain things in terms of other simpler things. I don't have any problem with that. On the contrary, I consider myself a reductionist. The problem is what you try to reduce things to. It's not the reduction itself, but what you reduce it to, what you try to reduce it to. The latter is what philosophers call the reduction base. If you choose a reduction base, then you have to explain everything else in terms of the components or the entries in that reduction base, the elements of that reduction base. And it is a generally accepted consensus value in science and philosophy that the smaller the reduction base is, the better it is. Because ultimately you can say, no, my reduction base is the entire world. Yeah, then you're not reducing anything. You're not explaining anything in terms of something else. You're basically saying that everything is fundamental. Everything is a brute fact. It's a given of nature. I think that's wrong. I think we can explain things in terms of other things. Science has shown that this can be done very often, almost always, not always, but almost always. But we have to choose our reduction base well. If materialism chooses descriptions as the reduction base, and then they have to reduce that which is described to the description, it's like a dog chasing its own tail, because everything started from the qualities, and then we use quantities to describe the relative differences between qualities, fine, but then I try to reduce the qualities to the quantities. Yeah, it's a painter trying to explain himself in terms of his self-portrait. It's not going to work. So reductionism, fine. Materialism chooses the wrong things to reduce reality to. I would reduce reality to transpersonal consciousness. I would say that everything can be explained in terms of the particular patterns of excitation or the particular topologies of universal consciousness. So I am a reductionist too, but I'm not trying to reduce qualities to quantities. I'm trying to reduce complex qualities to simpler qualities. I'm trying to reduce the complicated, rich world on the screen of perception, the complicated, rich world of our endogenous feelings, emotions, thoughts, reduce all that to patterns of excitation of a universal subject, so to say, a universal experiencer. And I think that reduction is possible. There is nothing consistent with it. There is no logical error in trying to do that. We are not trying to bridge qualities to quantities in here. We are not replacing reality with a description of reality. None of these errors are made, but it is still reductionist.
The same questioner then said that the next part of the question has actually been answered. So that's great. And maybe sometimes I'll just jump in to get you to give a brief explanation of some philosophical terms. Just some people have less experience with philosophical terms. So I'm curious, for example, metaphysical, so we're discussing metaphysical materialism. Is so perhaps a word or two on what you mean by metaphysical, and is that distinct from a different kind of materialism?
Yes, you would have ethical materialism, which is the idea that the greatest value of life is to accumulate material goods. So a materialist person in that sense is somebody who is focused on consumerism, on buying stuff, buying shoes, clothes, cars, and this stuff. That's a material. The material girl of Madonna is an ethical materialist, not a metaphysical materialist. A metaphysical materialist would be the one that says all that truly exists is matter. And matter is exhaustively defined in terms of quantities. Everything else, including qualities, can be reduced to matter and therefore to quantities. That's a metaphysical materialist. Ontology is the study of what is the nature, the essence of things, what things are, as opposed to how things behave. The latter would be science. So ontology is the study of the essence of things and the self as well, their inner nature.
I've understood so far that materialism explains consciousness by brain processes, activity in neurons. Do I understand you correctly that you would like to call these descriptions, in quotes? If yes, why would these processes be the painting of the painter?
I think what we call brain processes, and in which we describe quantitatively in terms of graphs, levels of metabolism, and all that. Indeed, those are descriptions from a certain point of view of our conscious inner life. From my first-person point of view, I would describe my inner life in one way. But the neuroscientist has a different point of view into my inner life through brain scanners. And that instrumentation will provide quantitative measurements of brain activity distribution. And that's another point of view, another description that the neuroscientist has. So these are all descriptions. Now, why would that description be equivalent to the self-portrait? Quite straightforward. A materialist will say that we are our neurons. We are our neural activities, our neural activity. There is nothing to our consciousness but what can be described in terms of neural activity. That's materialism. So what they are saying is that we are our description. We are that description. Neurons and the way they fire, the way they interconnect, these are descriptions of qualities that we feel from within. The moment we say we are that, and we reduce our conscious inner life, we reduce those qualities we feel directly, we are directly acquainted with, to those descriptions, we are trying to replace the painter by the self-portrait. Because what is the self-portrait? The self-portrait is a description of the painter, made by the painter, a description of himself or herself. It's an auto description, so to say, a self-description of the painter. When the painter says, I am that self-portrait, he makes the mistake of taking away the reality of his own being and trying to replace it with his description of himself. And I think that's exactly the same problem that materialism incurs. It can describe our conscious inner life in a certain way in terms of neurons and firings and all that. But then it says, well, all that exists are the neurons and the firings, and our conscious inner life is a side effect, a byproduct, an epiphenomenon of that neural activity, ultimately reducible to that. In other words, you can explain everything there is to explain about our conscious inner life in terms of neural firings. That's entirely equivalent to saying that you can explain the entire conscious inner life of the painter in terms of patterns of pigment distribution on canvas. And it's equally impossible.
Maybe epiphenomena is worth...
Yes, I've tried to use several synonyms in order to sort of clarify that right at the back door. An epiphenomenon is something that is reducible. It doesn't have existence in and of itself. It's a product of something else. Heat is an epiphenomenon of a molecular vibration. There is no such a thing as heat in and of itself. Heat is a way we have to describe a molecular vibration. That's one way to put it. Wetness is an epiphenomenon of the electromagnetic properties of water molecules. When they get together, they have surface tension and all that, and that leads to what we call wetness. But there is no wetness independently of water. Wetness is an epiphenomenon of water. A ripple on the surface of a lake is an epiphenomenon. There is nothing to the ripple but the water. But if the water moves in a certain way, then that pattern arises that we've labeled a ripple. And you can even describe it. You can point at it and say, the ripple is right there, right now. It has this speed. It's going that direction. It has this height, this breadth. So you can attach all kinds of descriptors to the ripple, and yet it is an epiphenomenon because there is nothing to it but the water. So it's an epiphenomenon of water. So epiphenomena are things that don't exist in and of themselves. They are explainable in terms of something else. Ultimately, all there is to an epiphenomenon is something else. So for a materialist, experience is epiphenomenal. It doesn't exist in and of itself. Ultimately, all there is to it can be made sense of in terms of quantities. And there is nothing left. After you described it with those quantities, there's nothing left to be said about it. In other words, it's like saying that if you tell a person born blind the quantities that define the color red, that the person would know what it is like to see red, which is patently absurd. Okay, this is a very important slide because philosophy, or let me be more specific, metaphysics and science get conflated all the time, especially by militant scientists who have no clue what philosophy is, what metaphysics is. For these people, metaphysics means mysticism. So they didn't bother to look up the actual definition of the word. And they think that science can make statements about the essence of things, what things essentially are. That is a mistake. That is a failure of basic knowledge of philosophy of science. The entire method of science is an experimental method. Science answers questions by experimentation. It poses a question to nature in the form of an experiment, and nature answers that question by manifesting a certain behavior in response to the experiment that has been set up. In other words, all that science can tell us about is how nature behaves, not what nature essentially is. The essential being of things, what things essentially are, is fundamentally beyond the scope of the scientific method. It is not something that you can deal with purely in terms of experimentation. Now, mind you, science does inform metaphysics, because any metaphysical theory that implies a certain natural behavior that contradicts what science has proven to be the case is false. Metaphysics cannot contradict proven science. By implication, if you have a theory about what things are that implies a certain behavior that is contradicted by experiment, then your theory about what things are is wrong. However, it is not sufficient to observe behavior in order to pin down what things are. Science helps metaphysics, but it is not a replacement for metaphysics. Experimentation does not replace the methods of philosophy. Experimentation does not uniquely pin down the essence of things, because experimentation only tells you about how things behave, not what things are. To pin down what things are, or at least to have the best possible hypothesis about what things are, you need, one, the output of science. You need to know how nature behaves, because you can't contradict. But you also need to be logically coherent. You cannot have a theory that contradicts itself. You need to be internally consistent. Statements should not oppose, internally consistent means that statements of your theory should not contradict one another. And logical coherence means that the statements should cohere, should come together to form a bigger overall picture. So these are two extra values in addition to the behavior of nature. Then you need to be conceptually parsimonious. You should not postulate more things than you need to explain things. You should not postulate more hypotheses than you need to make sense of things. It should be empirically adequate. In other words, it should be consistent with science. If you contradict science, then your theory about what things are is wrong. And it should be explanatorily powerful. It should help us make sense of things. If you have a beautiful theory that explains nothing, that doesn't help us to sort anything out, then it's not very helpful. It's not the best metaphysical option. So you see, you have 5 values here. Only one of which is related to science. All the other 4 are related to the methods of philosophy. So it is important not to conflate science with philosophy. Those who do that do a disservice to philosophy, and most importantly and most seriously, they do a disservice to science, because we will lose sight of what science is really telling us, what science is really good at. If we lose sight of that, it's not a good thing. We will miss out on opportunities for development down the road. So I think this is a very important thing. Materialists conflate philosophy and science all over the place. Not only do they not understand materialism, as I alluded to in the beginning, they think that the effectiveness of science somehow proves, or at least constitutes, strong evidence for materialism. And that is entirely false. It doesn't constitute at all any evidence in favor of materialism. On the contrary, if anything, the behavior of nature that we have been observing over the last 40 years outright contradicts the metaphysics of materialism. For instance, materialism requires physical realism. It requires that physical objects exist in and of themselves in a defined way, independent of whether they are measured or observed or not. Because if that's not the case, then there is no objectively existing self-standing material world out there in a defined form. That's basically the definition of physical realism. And quantum physics has basically thrown physical realism out the window. News that is already relatively old. The first strong evidence in favor of this view, of this conclusion, has come up in 1981, the experiments of Alain Aspect and his team in France. A number of experiments followed up, because it's so hard to part with physical realism in the mindset of materialists. Materialists need to believe that there are objects with defined position, defined form, defined momentum out there, irrespective of observation or measurement. And science is telling us that that's not the case. So materialists come up with all kinds of incredibly implausible hypotheses for why the experiments are showing what they are showing, in a way that could still be made consistent with materialism. And these are extraordinarily implausible hypotheses, which are taken seriously anyway because of the momentum behind the metaphysical belief of materialism. So experiments have been repeatedly redone to close the so-called loopholes. Yeah, that's how these things have been described. There are loopholes in the experiments that leave a door open for physical realism or materialism. And progressively, more and more sophisticated experiments have been done since 1981, culminating in 2015, perhaps 2018, depending on which experiment you think is more convincing, that steadily have closed all of those loopholes and steadily have shown that the conclusion is the same and it's inevitable. There is no such a thing as physical realism. Whatever the world out there is, it is not physical. Physicality arises only upon observation, upon an interaction of the experimenter or of the observer with this objective world. Short of that interaction, short of an observation, short of a measurement, there are no such things as physical entities with defined shape, position, and speed, whatever. They are just not there. There is surely something out there. It's common sense that there is something out there because we describe the world in very consistent ways, but that something is not physical. My alternative, of course, would be to say it is mental, and physicality arises from observation, because physicality is the act of observation, the qualities on the screen of perception. So it's very important to make this separation if we are to progress in a sane way. Conflating science and philosophy leads to all kinds of issues, all kinds of dilemmas, all kinds of contradictions that are just not helpful for us. I think there is a question. I don't mind taking a question now.
Someone wanting if you could give more details regarding these experiments to look up later, perhaps in the chat, or we could also email them to everyone.
If you go to my website, bernardokastrup.com, and you go to, there's a top menu, a horizontal menu right at the top, and you click on papers. One of the papers in the list you will see, it's a technical paper, but one of them basically summarizes all the laboratory physical evidence that goes against, that refutes physical realism. An alternative is to click on the SciAm menu, Scientific American. I abbreviate it on my website. I just say SciAm. Click on there, and you will be you will go to my personal page on the Scientific American website. It has a list of all my Scientific American essays, and two of them that have quantum physics in the title, two of them discuss at length all the evidence, the experimental evidence that has been amassing over the past 40 years that refute physical realism. So these are the two key pointers. Yeah.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you.
So I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so now that we have these 5 key values for choosing a metaphysics, we can evaluate materialism according to these values and see how well materialism scores. My answers may be slightly biased, but not very much. I truly believe that my answers are not very much biased, maybe a little bit. Is materialism logically coherent? I would say it's not. The statements of materialism do not cohere to form a whole. Because one statement of materialism is to say that matter, which is defined purely in terms of quantities, is all that exists. And then it tries to say that mind comes from matter. In other words, qualities come from quantities. That which is described comes from the description. That's like a dog chasing its own tail. It does not cohere because matter is an abstraction of mind. A description is a product of mind. How can you explain mind in terms of its own product, in terms of its own abstraction? I do not think that coheres. Number 2, is it internally consistent? Does it not contradict itself? I think it does contradict itself because it defines matter as that which has no qualities. And then it tries to account for qualities in terms of matter, after having defined matter as that which is totally and utterly distinct from qualities. I do not think that that is internally consistent. Is it conceptually parsimonious? I don't think it is, because all that we know for sure, all that nature gives us as a given, as a hard, brute, undeniable fact, is that experience exists, mind exists. Before scientists and philosophers conjured up materialism 400 years ago, mind was all there was. The world was made of qualities. People thought that the green of a forest was really out there in the forest and not created inside your head. So qualities are the only thing that is given, that nature gives us to begin with. We are directly acquainted with it. Now, what materialism does, it conjures up something else. It conjures up matter, which supposedly is totally different from experience, completely distinct. You cannot even visualize it, because by visualizing, you already bring qualities to it, and matter has no intrinsic qualities. So it conjures up an extra, something that is not a given, a given of nature. It conjures up that extra in order to make sense of things, while we can make sense of things without that extra. So I think that extra is unnecessary. It is inflationary. It defies parsimony. Let me give you a better idea of what parsimony means and why we have to stick to it. We cannot surrender parsimony. Imagine that one day you wake up and you go to your backyard and you see some strange footprints on your garden, close to your window. And then you come up with two hypotheses. Hypothesis number one: a burglar jumped into your backyard and tried to open your window, making footprints on the process, failed and went away, and that's why you saw the footprints. Hypothesis number two: aliens landed at your neighbor's backyard. The aliens left their ship, didn't like the feel of the earth ground on their feet, stole your neighbor's shoes, jumped the fence, and went for a stroll on your backyard with your neighbor's stolen shoes, then jumped the fence back, went back to your neighbor, deposited your neighbor's shoes back where they were very neatly, climbed on their spaceship, and flew back to the Pleiades. Now, which hypothesis is better? Of course, it's the burglar. Now, can you disprove the other hypothesis, the alien hypothesis? No, you cannot disprove it. The evidence is consistent with the second hypothesis, as it is consistent with the first. In fact, it is equally consistent with both hypotheses. Both hypotheses account for the footprints. The footprints are consistent with both. You cannot discriminate one from the other unless you appeal to parsimony. Which hypothesis is simpler? Which hypothesis postulate less things to account for observations? Obviously, it's the burglar, not the aliens. Now, is there anything etched in stone in nature that says categorically that the simpler, more parsimonious explanations are always the true ones? No, there is nothing etched in stone in nature that guarantees that. But if we give up on parsimony, we open ourselves to aliens from the Pleiades. We open the gates to all kinds of nonsense. We cannot create a culture, a civilization, based on a mythology that disregards parsimony. It is extraordinarily dangerous to do that. So we need to stick to parsimony. It's the best we can do. It's not guaranteed to be effective, but it is the best we can possibly do. Now, if we stick to it, now we have to apply it consistently, meaning we have to apply this guiding principle, this rule of thumb of parsimony, to materialism itself. And when we apply it to materialism, materialism fails. It is not the most parsimonious explanation because it postulates matter in addition to mind. And then it tries to reduce mind to matter, which is inconsistent. another alternative that could make sense of everything in terms of mind alone, transpersonal as it may be, but mind alone as an ontological category would be more parsimonious and win over from materialism. Is materialism empirically adequate? Well, I already went at length into the laboratory evidence that refutes physical realism and therefore, by implication, refutes materialism. 40 years of accumulated evidence, extraordinarily strong evidence. But there is more. There is a broad pattern that associates impairment of brain function, reductions of brain activity with expanded awareness, with richer inner life, richer experience. And this is at least difficult to make sense under materialism, because materialism says that brain function, brain activity is experience, or at least that it generates experience somehow in a way that nobody can make sense of. So if you have less brain function, less brain activity overall, then you should have less rich experience, because we are talking about the same thing, just giving two names to it. But as it turns out, there is this broad pattern that associates certain types of brain function impairment, of reduction of brain activity, certain types, not all types, of course, but certain types are consistently associated with richer conscious inner life. I would submit that this is something that materialism cannot adequately account for. And therefore, for this reason too, it is not empirically adequate. And is materialism explanatorily powerful? I would say this is the worst of all the failures of materialism, because it fails to account for experience, which at the end of the day is all we have. All there is, as far as we are directly acquainted with, is experience. If you fail to explain experience because of the heart problem, the explanatory gap, whatever name you want to give it, if you fail that, there is a strong sense in which you failed everything. You failed to explain everything except for some abstractions. You've explained the behavior of nature, but you fail to explain the essence of that which is experience itself. I want to talk a little bit about constitutive panpsychism, because it is the reloaded version of materialism. It's the way to keep materialism in play, despite the untenability of the heart problem, or the explanatory gap, or the empirical inadequacy of materialism, or that's coming from physics, from neuroscience, and so on. Basically what it says is that you still have matter. Matter is still out there. But experiences are not generated by arrangements of matter. No, experiences are a fundamental property or aspect of matter. They are fundamental, just like mass, spin, momentum. So matter has mass, has spin, has momentum, and has experiential states. That's the postulate of constitutive panpsychism. So basically, you are just adding something to the reduction base. You're not explaining anything at all. You are avoiding the need to explain, the need to reduce, by throwing something extra in the reduction base, in the little pot of another coin to the pot of the reduction base. What panpsychism says, constitutive panpsychism. I would just say panpsychism from now on. There are different variations, but I don't want to keep on repeating the same word. So every time I say panpsychism, I mean constitutive panpsychism. It says that all matter is conscious, fundamentally. So an electron, as a elementary subatomic particle, is conscious, according to panpsychism. There is something it is like to be an electron. An electron has inner life, it feels something. But according to panpsychism, the structure of consciousness is still the structure of matter. Matter is fragmented. You can divide it down into myriad elementary subatomic particles. And panpsychism will say that consciousness is like that as well. It's divided down into elementary tiny bits of consciousness, each one corresponding to an elementary subatomic particle. And that the complex, involved conscious inner life that I have, that you have, arises out of a combination of these microscopic little subjects of experience. Somehow, the experiential states corresponding to the elementary particles in our brain combine with one another in a way analogous to how things combine in chemistry. The experiential states combine and somehow give rise to this complex, seemingly unitary conscious inner life that I experience, that you experience. That's the idea. So again, to wrap it up, to wrap up the description, I want to go back to that. Panpsychism is just materialism reloaded. It's still starting from matter, from the structure of matter, and it's just adding to the reduction base of materialism. It's adding some experiential states. And it faces some impossible problems of its own, which is what I'm going to talk about now. But there's a question, maybe I'll take this one before I go to the next slide.
Is panpsychism an attempt to give the description consciousness?
Yes, that's a very nice way to put it. Yeah, panpsychism, that's exactly what it is. It's an attempt to attribute consciousness to the description. Brilliant. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm going to reuse this way of putting things. Hopefully, I'll give you credit. I can't see your name. I can't. Frank Ivins.
So you get some credit, Frank.
Yeah, you get some credit, Frank. Okay, next slide. So these are the problems of panpsychism. The idea that experiential states can combine in a physical-chemical manner is highly problematic. There is no coherent way of making sense of this. Many philosophers have already said that this constitutes a problem as hard as the hard problem of consciousness that motivated the creation of panpsychism to begin with. In other words, you avoid one evil just to go against another evil just as bad. You jump out of the pan and fall into the fire. There is no way to conceive, at least not even in principle, of how two different, fundamentally separate microscopic subjects can combine into a compound subject of experience. Notice that in your brain, neurons communicate through synapses. You see here one synapse. This is the end of one neuron and the beginning of another. And that's how they communicate, by releasing these neuron transmitters into the space between the two. And this is precisely the point, the space between the two. Neurons don't even touch. There is a so-called synaptic cleft in between them. Of course, this is not a vacuum. There is stuff in the cleft, but this stuff is not part of either neuron. It's the environment where the neurons are immersed. So neurons don't touch. So it's difficult to see how the subjectivity of one neuron can combine with the subjectivity of another. And if it does, then if you would crack the skull of two people open, nobody has done that, but it's a nice experiment for some impossibly cruel neuroscientists to do. Totally unethical, but let's entertain the thought as a thought experiment. If you crack the skull of two people open, including the dura mater, the membrane that covers the brain, and you would put these two people head to head, so their brains would directly touch while they are awake. Most brain surgery is done when people are awake, because you don't feel pain in the brain. I mean, all pain is felt in the brain except the supposed pain of digging into your own brain, and you don't feel that. So you could touch their brains, and would they have then compound inner life? Would they become one? I very much doubt that that would be the case. So in a nutshell, there are sophisticated philosophical arguments for this. One of the best ones is by Sam Coleman. He explains why it is incoherent to say that two fundamentally separate fields of subjectivity can combine to form a compound property. Like if you have a field of subjectivity in which the experience of blue is had, and then a fundamentally separate field of subjectivity in which the experience of red is had, if you combine them, it is incoherent to think that purple would be the resulting experience. And there is a paper-long argument explaining why this is incoherent, and there is no way I can address this here. I can refer you to the paper. Actually, I cite the paper in my second PhD thesis. But it is a very good argument. It is very carefully outlined. It's very solid, very rigorous. So in a nutshell, panpsychism was invented to avoid the hard problem of consciousness by throwing another coin in the little pot of your reduction base. But after doing that and infringing the principle of parsimony, it also faces a hard problem of its own. And that's not all. There are more problems in panpsychism. It commits a logical error. Panpsychism says that the structure of consciousness is the structure of matter, because matter can be divided down into subatomic particles. Then consciousness, according to panpsychism, can also be divided down into microscopic consciousnesses, which then combine to form a macroscopic consciousness, such as you, me, or the woman on the slide. In doing that, the panpsychist, and I will say this slowly, bear with me, try to follow me. It's very simple once you get it. The panpsychist is attributing to the experiencer, to that which experiences, a structure that is observed only in the experience itself. So the experience is what happens on the screen of perception. The structure of the world that we capture on the screen of perception is that of elementary subatomic particles. Yes, we've come so far as to realize that the world as it appears to perception can be divided down to elementary subatomic particles. In other words, the screen of perception is pixelated. If you look at it close enough, if you look close enough at the world with a microscope, you will see that you end up with these little subatomic particles and elementary subatomic particles, and there is nothing smaller than they are. They are the pixels of the world that we capture on the screen of perception, with or without the aid of instrumentation. So that's the pixelation of the screen of perception. Isn't that obvious? Elementary subatomic particles are the pixels of the screen of perception. If you look at the image of someone on the computer screen, like you are looking at my image right now on your computer screen, if you look very closely, unless you have a iMac Retina display, if you look very closely, you will see that my image is made up of little rectangular pixels. Those rectangular pixels are like the elementary particles of the physical world that we discern on the screen of perception. It is pixelated. But the panpsychist then goes and says, it's not only the screen of perception that's pixelated, it's the subject looking at the screen of perception, the inner life of the subject looking at the screen of perception that is also pixelated. Well, there is no logical necessity for this second step. My conscious inner life doesn't appear to me in a pixelated way. It seems very continuous, very unitary. I don't perceive the conscious inner life of one neuron and the conscious inner life of another neuron and another neuron coming together to form my unitary conscious inner life. It doesn't appear to me as pixelated. Now, my body is indeed made of elementary subatomic particles as far as I can perceive it when I look down, or when a doctor looks at my body, when a pathologist looks at my cells. Yes, a body is pixelated. But what is a body? A body is an image on the screen of perception. If the screen of perception is pixelated, of course the body will appear on it pixelated as well, just like my image appears on your computer screen pixelated. But I'm not made of little rectangular pixels. I appear like that to you because of the pixelation of your computer screen. In the same way that my body is made of elementary particles doesn't entail or imply that my subjectivity is made of little bits of microscopic subjectivities. That's a logical error. There is no implication there. It may be, but it's not entailed or implied by the structure of the physical world, that our subjectivities are also pixelated, also have the structure of matter, which is what the panpsychist assumes. The panpsychism thinks, well, my brain is made of elementary subatomic particles, and my brain generates my conscious inner life. Therefore, my conscious inner life must be constituted of the combination of these little microscopic subjectivities. No, there is no logical necessity in that step. It's an error. And that's what I'm trying to highlight here. I hope you could follow me. I'm going to then, maybe I'll give you 10 seconds to ask a question, because I'm going to move on to something completely different. So if you didn't follow me, that's the time. Or we can do that at the end as well. Okay, I don't see the little red thing popping, so there are no questions. I'll move on to the next. And this is the final, well, the final in my presentation today, problem of panpsychism. It's the coup de grace of against panpsychism. You know, yeah, how do I translate the French? Yeah, I don't know how to translate that. You know, when you already beat your enemy, but your enemy is still alive and struggling, and you do you skew him with your sword to kill him at the end, like a torero with the bull in Spain. It's the final punch, the final strike that just kills your opponent. So this is it. This is the final strike, a final blow. Yes, thanks, Ines. I can only see the beginning of the statement, but it's short enough. Yeah, shot of mercy. That's also a good one. So this is the final blow against panpsychism, because it reveals a false underlying assumption that arises from the physical naivete of most panpsychist philosophers. The panpsychist imagines micro separate subjectivities because the panpsychism visualizes elementary subatomic particles as little tiny bodies fundamentally separate from one another, tiny billiard balls that when they bounce against one another, their subjectivities combine, but they are fundamentally separate, like billiard balls are separate, except that these billiard balls are very, very, very tiny, unthinkably tiny, but they are little balls. That's how the panpsychist imagines elementary subatomic particles. And indeed, this is often a popular way physicists use to describe elementary subatomic particles to lay people, because it appeals to an intuition that we all share, but it is an oversimplification. Every physicist deserving of the name knows that this is just a metaphor. This little separate particles thing is a metaphor. There are no particles in physics. We've known this since quantum electrodynamics, since Feynman in the 1940s, since we've extended quantum mechanics to make it consistent with relativity. If you don't do that, of course you have an error, because relativity is true too, not only quantum mechanics. So you have to reconcile them. And the way to reconcile them was through quantum field theory, the first embodiment of which was quantum electrodynamics, for which Feynman and two others won the Nobel Prize, although Feynman was the guy who really came up with it. So since that time, we've known that there are no such things as separate elementary particles. What we call elementary subatomic particles are patterns of excitation of a field. Imagine a ripple on a lake. The lake is the field in my metaphor. If you throw a stone, a pebble on the lake, it will form ripples. And those ripples are very discernible. You can point at them and say, there is a ripple, and it's moving in that direction. And it's moving with that speed, and it has that height. So you can even characterize the ripple with physical quantities, such as speed, momentum, direction, mass, height. All of these things are valid descriptions of the ripple. But you cannot lift the ripple out of the lake. There is no such thing as a ripple in and of itself. What we call a ripple is just a pattern of movement of the field, a pattern of movement of the water. To call it a ripple or an elementary subatomic particle is just shorthand. It's a handy way to point at something, to communicate. but it shouldn't be interpreted as a ripple existing in and of itself. It shouldn't be interpreted as something that you can grab out of the lake and take it out of the lake. No, a ripple is not separate from the lake. One ripple is not separate from another ripple. There is nothing to either ripple but the lake behaving in a certain way. So when we talk of elementary subatomic particles, it's like talking of ripples. And we've known this for 80 years, except that the panpsychist doesn't seem to know it, because it thinks of elementary subatomic particles as separate entities. It thinks as two ripples, as things that are separate and not as just different patterns of excitation of one underlying field. The particle is the field, in the same sense that the ripple is the lake. There is nothing to the particle but the field, in the same sense that there is nothing to the ripple but the water in the lake. So if you get rid of this wrongly assumed separation, fundamental separation between different subatomic particles, panpsychism fails, because panpsychism uses this separation to explain why your conscious inner life is separate from mine. The panpsychist will say, well, your conscious inner life arises from a combination of the micro-subjectivities of the separate subatomic particles that compose your brain, they come together in your brain, and mine is separate because the subatomic particles in my brain are separate from those in your brain, and those in mine only come together inside my head, not inside yours. That's why my conscious inner life is separate from yours. But guess what? News, breaking news, there are no particles. There are only spatially unbound quantum fields. The quantum field is spatially unbound. It has no boundaries. It does not end anywhere. They are universal. This is not new age stuff. It's hardcore quantum physics. A quantum field is not spatially unbound. Therefore, if the panpsychist wants to attribute consciousness as a fundamental property of an electron, the panpsychist has to attribute consciousness as a fundamental property of the quantum field that is the electron. And that quantum field is spatially unbound. It's in me, it's in you, it's in my cat, it's everywhere. It's in Andromeda, in the galaxy of Andromeda. It's across the universe. So it's universal consciousness. You see, the panpsychism, if it is to be physically coherent, it boils down to universal consciousness. And then it fails to explain personal subjectivity. Because if it's universal consciousness, then why are my thoughts separate from yours? Why can I not read your thoughts and you cannot read mine? Why do I not know what's happening in the galaxy of Andromeda? You see, idealism, analytic idealism, explains that in a different way. But panpsychism doesn't, because it assumes that particles are separate. So it doesn't even see the problem, let alone solve the problem. This physical incoherence in the whole panpsychist story, I think, is defining. It's the final blow against panpsychism. I've talked to a well-known panpsychist the other day, and his counter-argument to this was, well, but there is one version of physics, of quantum physics, that does postulate fundamentally separate elementary subatomic particles, and that's Bohmian mechanics. It is true, but the problem of Bohmian mechanics, and the reason it's not taken very seriously by many, is that it does not have a relativistic extension. And that's why it still preserves this notion of separate particles, because it cannot be reconciled with relativity. And I would submit to you that if you make Bohmian mechanics reconcilable with relativity, it will have to give up on this idea of elementary subatomic particles. So I don't think there is a way out of it. Constitutive panpsychism, if made physically coherent, will boil down to idealism, to the notion of a universal consciousness, except that it then fails to explain personal subjectivity. I will take a question now.
Would you call cosmopsychism a branch of panpsychism, or is it another name for idealism?
It's all these names that philosophers come up with in order to get fame or to get credit. I think cosmopsychism is an utterly unnecessary label for at least 200 years, actually many more, but for at least 200 years, we've had a perfectly good name called idealism. It should be ideism, not idealism, but turns out to be difficult to pronounce. So idealism is good enough. I think it's just another name for people who are reinventing the past and trying to get credit for it. I don't mean to pass judgment on my colleagues here, but I think it's unnecessary. Now, strictly speaking, there are two variations of the so-called cosmopsychist. One of them is just idealism. In this variation of cosmopsychism, what we call matter or physicality is just what conscious inner life looks like from a certain perspective. So there is no fundamental mass to the universe. There is no fundamental speed to the universe. Mass and speed are just quantitative tools to describe what the universe looks like from a certain perspective. So this version of panpsychism is idealist. Sorry, this version of cosmopsychism is identical, indistinguishable from idealism, because it postulates that all there fundamentally is consciousness. Physicality is just a description of how conscious inner life appears or presents itself or looks like from a certain perspective or presents itself to a certain observer. But there's another version of cosmopsychism that will say, well, there are no fundamental elementary subatomic particles, all right? The universe can only be described as a whole because of quantum entanglement and all that. We cannot describe parts of the universe. The universe's parts are just nominal. They're just convenient ways of communicating. There are no actual parts. There is only the whole. This whole is the cosmos, and the cosmos is conscious. But it would still grant, this version of cosmopsychism would still grant that the universe has other physical properties. However you want to describe this whole, say, through the equations of M theory, that universe would still be physical. It would still be fully characterized in terms of physical quantities. It would still be a physical object, if you will. But it would be conscious as a whole. This version of cosmopsychism is not equal to idealism. It's not equivalent to idealism because it grants fundamental reality to physicality and it adds consciousness to that physicality. So in a nutshell, version 1 of cosmopsychism would say the universe is consciousness, or the universe is in consciousness. This is idealism. Version 2 of cosmopsychism would say the universe is conscious, and that's not idealism. You see the difference? The universe is consciousness and the universe is conscious, or the universe is in consciousness or the universe is conscious. These are two separate things, and you may think it's a subtle difference, but it's not. It's a massive difference. So one version of cosmopsychism is idealism. The other is not. The other makes a concession to materialism and makes a concession to artifacts of bad thinking. It carries a baggage with it. It doesn't break away clean from prior mistakes. I'm almost at the end, and our time is also almost at the end. I think I have only 1 or 2 more slides, so I will finish it, and then we can answer questions until the end. This is my final slide. So in conclusion, I don't think what we can call mainstream metaphysical physicalism, or in short, materialism, or constitutive panpsychism are tenable. They have fundamental problems, insoluble problems, problems that cannot be solved because they don't exist out there. They are artifacts of bad thinking. I think we have to make a clean break from them. They have played a historical role over the last 300-400 years, well, maybe 200-300 years. But they outlived their youthfulness. It's time to move on, because the problems are insurmountable, and these are not healthy narratives. I mean, I think the biggest value here is truth. The narrative that's closer to truth is the one we should adopt regardless of the price. If that narrative is morally demeaning and sucks the meaning out of our lives, then so be it. It's the closest we can get to truth. So be it that it makes life pointless. So be it that it destroys any basis for morality, if it is the closest to truth. But materialism is not, and neither is panpsychism. I will call them both materialism now, including that version of cosmopsychism that carries that luggage with it. It's not the closest to truth we can get. And on that account, we should reject them. But in addition to that, and as a bonus, they are also morally demeaning, and they destroy whatever purpose or meaning there might be to human life. So we are paying that price for no reason. We are living under a morally demeaning, meaningless narrative for no reason, because it isn't even the closest to truth we can get. As a matter of fact, these are narratives that are demonstrably false, empirically and logically demonstrable. Okay. None of what I just said denies that there is a world beyond our private, personal minds. All that I am denying is that that world is outside mind as a category, that it's not even transpersonal mind, that it's something fundamentally different from mind, that it's something purely quantitative, something exhaustively described through equations. That's what I'm denying. I'm not denying that there is a world out there beyond our personal minds. Clearly there is. What I'm going to be talking about next week is an alternative narrative, an alternative to materialism, in which the universe is not conscious. The universe is in consciousness, or, which is the same thing, the universe is consciousness, a transpersonal form of consciousness. And I'll try to make sense of everything, the correlations between brain activity and inner experience, the fact that we can use a material substance like alcohol to change how we feel from within, that can explain why we all seem to share the same world, that can explain why we cannot change the world by a mere act of volition in the same way that we can change our imagination. So try to make sense of all the empirical givens on the basis of consciousness alone, without postulating anything other than consciousness as an ontic category. That's for next week. So we're almost at the end. I will give the word back to you, Amir, so you can decide how we go about it now.
One kind of practical question, Bernardo, in terms of like following in on this. You've written several books, and I'm wondering if anyone wants to dive further into what we're covering here and they're new to your work. When an author has written several books, it's sometimes harder to know, okay, is the most recent one the best one to dive into? Or is it kind of like, actually, I should go back to the first book you've ever written?
My most recent one that's already published now is it's largely academic. It's called The Idea of the World. It's a collection of academic papers with some extra material added to try to digest it a little bit more. But it's a very rigorous book. So if you are after a rigorous case for idealism, that's the book to go. It's not based on metaphors. It bites the bullet head on. If you want something more accessible, that as a price is not as rigorous as The Idea of the World, then I would recommend Why Materialism is Baloney. Despite the title, which is very confrontational, it is a book about idealism. Or More Than Allegory, which is a book about religious myths, but in the context of talking about religious myths, it introduces idealism very thoroughly, in more depth than in any of my other books, including The Idea of the World, because rigor has a price. You can't go as deep as you can go with metaphors. So More Than Allegory is my deepest book, but it is ostensibly a book about religion. Actually, it's a book about reality, but because religion talks about what's supposed to be reality, it's also a book about religion. It's a deeper view into reality. So, and I have a number of other books. There is one about the metaphysics of Arthur Schopenhauer. It's coming out now at the end of July. And if you understand that book, which discusses Schopenhauer, you will understand 75% of what there is to be understood about idealism, because Schopenhauer was way ahead of his time. He anticipated a lot of what we are talking about today. Some people say that I don't take enough credit, that I attribute too much to Schopenhauer, but I do that sincerely. Maybe I'm hallucinating too much into Schopenhauer's words, but I think he anticipated the core of what we are talking about here today. I'm very glad to give him all the credit, but that's coming out at the end of July.
And yeah, just to emphasize, I really, they're brilliant books, and I encourage diving into this material. It's quite wonderful to be able to engage in reading an author and then be able to ask, read these things and then ask questions to them on a weekly basis, as we have this opportunity for the next 3 weeks. Great. I feel very full and excited.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here with me today. It's been a lot of fun, even though I couldn't see you, so it's been a little bit lonely for me. I can only see Amir, but I see your comments and questions popping on the side of my screen, so I didn't feel too lonely. So thanks a lot, everyone.
Great. Thank you.